22nd of March is an important date in Resident Evil history. In 1996, it was the date when the original game launched on the PlayStation. Just 6 years later, the remake came out in Japan for the Gamecube. Resident Evil 1996 codified the survival horror genre, giving a name to the combination of exploration, puzzle solving, inventory management, and limited combat resources that had arguably been seen in games before, but which came to be inextricably identified with this franchise. However, Resident Evil 2002 perfected survival horror in a remake that built expertly on its predecessor's legacy, ironing out the rough patches and creating a game which holds up far better in the modern era of gaming than any other Resident Evil game. In honour of these two conjoined anniversaries, let's take a deeper look at
Chris Redfield. Resident Evil.
What became Resident Evil could have been very different. Originally conceived as a remake of the 1989 Famicom game Sweet Home, whose creator Tokuro Fujiwara served as the game's producer. He was also the mentor of Shinji Mikami, who would direct not only Resident Evil but also Dino Crisis, Resident Evil 4, and The Evil Within. You may have heard of him. Sweet Home had a number of elements from inventory management to the door loading screen to the use of notes and diary entries for storytelling that Resident Evil adopted. According to Fujiwara, the basic premise was that I'd be able to do things that I wasn't able to include, mainly on the graphics front. He was confident that horror games could become a genre in themselves. However, as Resident Evil evolved from a remake, it wasn't just Sweet Home that it took direction from. The iconic fixed camera angles were inspired by the 1992 PC game Alone in the Dark. This led Shinji Mikami to move away from his original vision for a first-person game. Though he was reluctant to do this, concerned that it had an effect on immersion, making the player feel a bit more detached, it also offered a solution to the technical limitations of the original PlayStation. The fully 3D first-person prototype didn't get along so well with the original PlayStation specs. On the other hand, pre-rendered backgrounds allowed for a higher level of detail in the environment. Another initial concept which was removed due to technical limitations was co-op gameplay. Although we saw some elements of this in Resident Evil Zero's partner zapping system and Resident Evil 5's two-player design, the early Resident Evil games are known for their sense of isolation, with multiple characters playable mainly through separate scenarios. Originally, this wasn't to be the case, and Chris and Jill would have stuck together and the player would have used menu commands to control their AI partner. Interestingly, videos of beta co-op gameplay also hint at a real-time weapon switching, a function which was also dropped and wouldn't be used until much later in the series. This earliest version of the game also featured a cyborg called Gelza, and an African-American man named Dewey completing the lineup of S.T.A.R.S. They don't appear to have survived beyond concept art, however, and their removal suggests a change in tone with the game's writing to what it would become. The final important changes to mention are the removal of the cemetery, which again only seemed to exist in concept art, and a message written in blood on a wall that reads, "Painful breathing. Someone stop this suffering." The graveyard, of course, made a comeback in the 2002 remake, in which the message in blood comes back as part of the story thread involving Spencer Mansion architect George Trevor and his family's tragic fate. The remake, like the original game, was directed by Mikami. It was the result of a deal between Capcom and Nintendo to bring both previous and new games to the Gamecube. Whilst Resident Evil 2, 3 and Code Veronica were simply ported, the original game was to be rebuilt from the ground up. Partly, this is because of how poorly the graphics of the original game had aged, even then. Poor localization was another reason. Mikami's aim was to bring the game closer to his original vision for the series. In this, he certainly achieved. Whilst the original game was effective for its time as a horror title, it is most famous for its cheesy dialogue.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you. That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
It's me, Chris.
Is that you, Rebecca?
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
This house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch! Rebecca, be careful.
Jill, you're here too.
Yes, you're here too?
I'm sorry for my lack of manners, but I'm not used to escorting men.
Do you think we could see Tyrant now?
Barry, you're so optimistic.
The remake not only served to improve the script by making it less cartoonish, it also added new areas such as the graveyard and a much more eerie and lonely atmosphere with the backgrounds, the lighting, and the lightning. We also saw the addition of the iconic Crimson Head zombies and Lisa Trevor, an indestructible creature as tragic as she was terrifying. Perhaps the most important update, however, was to the controls. Of course, there is the option to use more updated controls which operate relative to the camera position. However, for fixed camera angles, I always find tank controls easier to use and less likely to see me unintentionally changing directions when the camera switches. Even here, the tank controls of the remake feel a lot smoother and more intuitive than those of the original. The controls on the original were so clunky, and made in particular the final Tyrant boss fight so awkward, that I had to make a whole video about it. Between the two games, the story is broadly the same. Spoilers follow, so check the timestamps in the description if you wish to avoid them. We open up in the air, as the Alpha team of the Raccoon Police Department's Special Tactics and Rescue Service travel by helicopter out of the city and into the Arklay Mountains. The city has been plagued by cannibal murders in recent weeks, and now the S.T.A.R.S Bravo team has gone missing. Pilot Brad Vickers sets the chopper down when they find the crashed remains of the Bravo helicopter, abandoned. Alpha team members Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton and Joseph Frost, along with their Captain Albert Wesker, search the area. Joseph finds the body of RPD pilot Kevin Dooley moments before he is ambushed and mauled to death by a pack of ravenous zombie dogs. When Brad takes off in terror, Wesker, Chris, Jill and Barry seek refuge in the nearby Spencer mansion. However, they soon lose contact with each other. If you play as Jill, then Chris is the first to go missing, and when you and Barry investigate gunshots beyond the dining room, Wesker goes missing too. As Chris, Barry is missing, and when you investigate the gunshots alone, then Jill and Wesker disappear. From there, Chris alone, or Jill having split up with Barry, must explore the rooms of the mansion in search of answers. With much backtracking and puzzle solving, you unlock almost all of the rooms in the mansion and, eventually, a way outside. Along the way, zombies, dogs, a giant snake, a killer plant, mutated sharks, and hunters all present themselves as obstacles and threats. In the remake, you also have to contend with Crimson Heads and Lisa Trevor. Between the main mansion, the mansion grounds, the staff dormitory with its underground aqua ring, and a hidden cave system, players slowly uncover a dark conspiracy in a hidden laboratory. The mansion was home to researchers for the Umbrella Corporation, conducting illegal experiments to create biological weapons and a virus which turns people into zombies. Though this is not its intended purpose, as its creators aim to create tyrants as the ultimate biological weapons. Bravo team members' corpses are dotted around the estate, though Chris finds rookie Rebecca Chambers still alive, and both Chris and Jill find Richard Aitken after a giant snake has taken a chunk out of him. He will either sacrifice himself to save Jill from the snake, or to save Chris from a shark. But there is a traitor within S.T.A.R.S. Bravo team captain Enrico Marini tries to warn the player before being killed from the shadows. Jill has reason to suspect Barry. However, it turns out that he's acting under orders from Wesker, having had his family threatened. Discovering the threat was a ruse, he turns on Wesker to save Jill. If you're playing as Chris, he fights with Wesker alone. Either way, Wesker reveals his plans by taking you to see the Tyrant, only for it to break free and murder him. You kill the Tyrant and escape, only for the facility's self-destruct to be activated. After a further battle with the Tyrant, who of course doesn't die first time and needs a rocket launcher to the face, Brad finally rescues the remaining heroes. If Chris or Jill freed the other and kept Barry or Rebecca alive in the process, then you get the good ending. Despite some cheesy moments, even in the remake, the story of secret experiments creating monsters in an underground lab is iconic, and gave birth to a whole franchise with extensive lore that stretches across decades both in-game and out. It's where the most recognisable villain and the most popular protagonists of the series emerged, and it's the benchmark by which all other works, not only of Resident Evil, but also of survival horror more broadly, are judged. My entry into the series was with Resident Evil 2, which came out not long after I got a PlayStation. Even then, I found it difficult to go back to the first game because of how clunky it felt. Since then, Resident Evil 3 and Code Veronica have earned their places among my favourites. Of the remakes, I played the 2019 Resident Evil 2 and 2020 Resident Evil 3 more than Resident Evil 2002. However, even with that, I can recognise when playing the 2002 game that it is pretty much the pinnacle of the survival horror genre. It is also the quintessential series remake, capturing the essence and improving on the story and lore in deeper ways than the remakes did for 2 or 3. As for the original game, despite its clunkiness and cheesiness, or perhaps because of them, it remains an important game. Without it, we wouldn't have the rest of the series, or, arguably, many other games from Silent Hill all the way to Made of Scare and Tormented Souls. We also wouldn't have Jill Sandwiches or Masters of Unlocking. The gaming and horror landscape would look very different. So, if you've not yet experienced the original Mansion Incident, then I would highly recommend picking up whatever version you can of the 2002 game today, or even a version of the 1996 game if you're feeling especially brave. It won't be an easy experience. You will have to decide when to fight and when to flee, risking a bite to conserve ammo. You will feel isolated and alone, unsure of what will happen next. You will possibly get lost as you backtrack through narrow corridors and navigate claustrophobic spaces looking for the next key or clue. You'll have to be careful with your saves to ensure you don't lose too much progress when you die. It's a daunting prospect. There's a lot to be scared of. But it's thrilling too, and you'll want to know how it all ends. So come and find out. Enter the survival horror. Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and consider subscribing. Check out the link to my Patreon in the description to support my content and get perks like early access and a shout out on my videos. See you next time.